Okay, this is a solution to adding that interesting background parallax motion effect. So I'm going to make my dot class first, and dots are things that are very similar to cactuses insofar as they display themselves on the screen and they move to the left, and when they're off the screen to the left, they'll recycle their own position. So I'm going to start by copying the cactus class and pasting it, and I'm going to call it dot. And then let's open up dot. And I'm going to go through dot and think about what needs renaming, what needs removing, things like this. So I think dots need all these variables. Except it doesn't need an image, actually, because a dot is going to display as a circle. So I'm going to delete the image part. Should I have a speed? I think yes, that probably makes sense. Okay, so now inside draw, we had a discussion before about how each method should do exactly one thing. So I don't want my draw method to do any detecting of being off the screen or resetting. Draw is just going to draw the dot. So I'm going to ask my screen, did I call it screen? Yeah. So I'm going to ask my screen to fill with a particular fill color, and I'm going to choose a kind of a neutral gray. So 200, 200, 200. And then I'm going to ask the screen to draw an ellipse located at the XY coordinate for my ellipse. And then we can experiment with the size. And actually, maybe it's a better idea, instead of having this mysterious number 20, to actually call this size. So I'm going to call this diameter. And I'm going to call that diameter. And then up here, I'll say, oops, let's create a variable up here called diameter. And I'll say this dot diameter equals 20. And if I wanted to, I could take it as an input to the dot constructor. Let's also make all of these float, actually, because maybe I don't want my speed to be an int. Okay, so far so good. So I can make my dot. I've given it a speed and a size and a position. I can draw it. Move left. This looks fine. Is off screen to left. Looks fine. Reset position. Do I want to do this randomly or not? Well, let's leave it this way for now. And if we want to, we can think about resetting its X position to be something random. So dot looks good. Now let's make sure it's working and see, can we just create like one dot and watch it go? Because if that works, then we can be confident that we'll add lots of dots in an array list. So I'm going to make a dot variable d. And here I'll say d equals new dot. And I've already forgotten what the constructor looks like, so let's go look at it. So it looks like I'm expecting a graphics window. Ooh, I don't need this file name anymore. Should have read this more carefully. And then a position. So dot, I'm going to give it this, because this refers to the currently running object, which is the game object, which is a papplet, which is a window, graphics window. So I'm taking this graphics window that's creating the dot, and I'm handing it here to W, so that makes sense. And then I guess I'm just going to create it like in the middle of the screen somewhere. It's like 300 and like 100. And then inside draw, I'm going to say d dot move left and d dot draw. And then let's watch it go. Okay, so I see the dot moving. Oh, it turns out I've chosen, maybe I'm going to use a different color because I've chosen the same color as the background, which is a little awkward. So let's make this 250, oops, let's make this 255. Wow. And I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Let's make it like diameter 8. Let's look at it again. Okay, it looks pretty good. Why is it white? What am I doing? It's white because I gave it 255. Okay, let's make it 0. It's early in the morning here. Okay, cool. So there is like a little black dot that moves. That looks wonderful. Let's now have it recycle. So if d dot is off screen to left, then d dot reset position. Okay, so this covers all the things I want the dot to do. Move it, draw it, check if it's off the screen, reset it. Okay, so that's working. So now let's go ahead and make a whole bunch of them. Well, actually, let me point something out. So if I had several dot objects like dot 1, dot 2, dot 3, I would need to copy and paste this code like this. .1, .2, .3, and so then I could make them have different starting positions. But then I would need to do these same steps for each of the dots. So this is like .1, and then I would do those same steps for .2, where I just changed the variable name. And then I do those same steps for .3. And this is I'm illustrating a bad way to approach this. It's bad because what if we want hundreds of dots? Well, we're not going to copy and paste hundreds of times. But you should pay attention. If you find yourself doing things like this, where you're copying and pasting code and doing the same thing over and over, you should stop and think, wait a minute, what's a better approach? So let me show you a better approach. Let's delete this. So instead of having separate variables for the dot objects, let's make an array list of dot objects, which I will call dot list. Got to import array list. Remember, this just declares the variable. Right now, this variable contains null because it's empty, and null means empty. So I've got to actually make a new array list of dot objects called dot list. And now what I can do is I can put in as many as I want. So if I wanted to do this, I could create a couple of dot objects like this, and then I could say dot list dot add d, dot list dot add d2, dot list dot add d3. This is still not the best approach because I don't want to have to create 100 dots by hand, which is where we're headed here. But let's keep this the way it is for a second and look at what would it look like down inside draw now that we have a list. So instead of saying move left draw blah for d, there is no d variable anymore. I know it looks like there is because it's up here, but I actually declared d here, which means it does not exist outside of setup. So really so these are just temporary holding variables so that we can add them to our list. So really all of the objects live in the list. So what I really want to do is I want to like get something out of a list. So I could do that this way. I could say .d equals .list.getZero. So now I'm saying please get the first thing in my dot list, save it inside D, and now I can tell it to do stuff like this. Okay, and that's working. The problem is I want to do that for all the dots in the list. So let's do this. Let's make a for loop where I'm going to start at location 0. I'm going to keep going as long as the location is smaller than the size of my dot list. And I'm going to add 1 to the location every time. And then I'm going to close it here. So here, location is looping through every location in the dot list. So now, instead of getting out the dot that's in location 0, let's use location lock. Because this is a number that's going to change with every loop. So as I repeat this code, I'm going to be getting different dots out of the list. And then once I've saved the dot into D, I'm telling D to move and to draw. But each time through the list, D is actually holding a different object. So let's run it. And now we see it's doing it for all 3 dots. But I don't have this code repeated 3 times. Instead, I have a loop, which does the repeating for me. Okay, so let's crank this up to lots and lots and lots of objects. So instead of creating them by hand right here, let's make a loop to create the dots that we want. Whenever you want to do something a lot of times, you should think loop. All right, so let's loop from 0 to 100, let's say. And the reason I just chose 100 is because this is how many dots I want to create. So I just want to loop 100 times. I don't care what I is, nothing like that. I'm just trying to repeat something 100 times. So what am I trying to repeat? Let's make a random x and a random y, okay? So float math.random times, so my random x is going to be anywhere between 0 and 800, and random y is going to be anywhere between 0 and 200, let's say, or let's say like maybe 160. And now I can use that to create a new dot object, which I'm going to save into D. So this, and then I'm going to construct my dot object with a random x and a random y. And are we happy? The answer is no, we're not happy. See how it says that the constructor with float and float is undefined? If I look at my constructor over here, I don't see float and float. I see int and int. So let's change that to be float and float. Because remember, the values that you're giving have to match the variables that are going to that they're going to get saved into. All right, cool. So now .list.add d. So what's going to happen is this is going to repeat 100 times. Every time I'm going to generate new random numbers. I'm going to use those random numbers to create the starting values for my dot object. And then I'm going to put my dot object into the list, and then I'm going to do it all over again. Okay, let's run it. Ah, voila. So many dot objects. Okay, great. So we probably don't like this weird gap, and we're wondering why is it happening. Also, we don't have a cool parallax effect yet. I'm going to make the dots even smaller. Just make them very tiny. Oh, that's better. Okay. And let's do this. I want to give them different speeds as well. So I'm going to take as an input speed, and then I'll say this dot speed equals speed. And that's now broken the constructor over here because I got to give it a speed. And let's create a couple of random speeds. So what do I want? So I'm going to generate a random number between 0 and 2. Oops. Does this make sense? Yeah. So that's between 0 and 2. And so now I'll say if randval, let's make float speed. And I'll say if the random value is 0, then let's set my speed to be 10. Otherwise, if my random value is 1, then let's set my speed to be 20. Otherwise, if my random value is 2, let's set speed to be 30. We might need to fiddle with these specific numbers, but the idea is I want to choose between 3 possible random speeds. Okay, and now when I'm constructing my dot, I need to give it as the last input, the speed. So I'm going to give it my speed variable here as the last input. And it's unhappy because why? Oh, it might not have been initialized. Okay, so let's initialize it to 0. All right, so again, this can be cleaned up a little bit, but let's write it first and then we'll clean it up. Interesting. That seems like it's too fast for a cool parallax effect. So let's slow it all down a little bit. So let's make this 15 and let's make this 20. It's still all too fast. So let's make this more like 5, and let's make this like 8, and let's make this 15. Yeah, that's kind of cool. We'll call that good. Okay, as our last cleaning step, I'd said that each object should be responsible for its own things. And so the fact that we're doing a lot of lines of code here to try and like make random values and set them up just right so that we can construct the dot in the right way, that feels like less good to me. So I want to try and put some of this code inside dot. So let's do this instead. Here, I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to make the dot starting with just all zeros. But then before I add it to the list, I'm going to say like set random position, which is a method I'm going to write, and then set random speed, which is a method I'm going to write. So now let's delete this. From the perspective of this code, it all looks a lot cleaner because I don't have to wonder like what is all of that crazy code doing. Instead, I'm like, all right, I'm making a dot. And now let's set it to have a random position and a random speed, and like I'm done. Okay, but now we actually have to enable those behaviors. So I'm going to hover and say create the method, and here we are inside the dot class, and I've got the set random position method. So, uh-oh. Well, there goes my code. I deleted the code. So what we can do is we can say this.x equals, and then that same code that I just deleted, math.random times 800. You know, and if you wanted to make a kind of a nicer random position, that's fine. And if you wanted the position not to be random, you could make a different method. Let's make this like 160, okay? So now that's going to work. Let's do set random speed. And let's do that same code here. Here, I'm just going to pause it while I retype it. Okay, I made it a little bit different. I made a random value. I just set my speed to a default speed of 5. And then if val is 1, I make it faster. And if val is 2, I make it even faster. Okay, so let's just make sure that it all still works. Cool, all still works. That is it.